Louis Gabriel Guillemain has been described as a nimble and extraordinary violinist, also a violinist full of fire, genius and life. Guillemain is largely forgotten today, except perhaps by music historians. So why is it important to consider him? Well, simply put, because along with other violinists of his time, he helped to shape the French school of violin playing, which was to become so influential on the art of the violin. Guillemain led a charmed life in many respects, but ultimately came to a miserable end. Let's go through his life then. He was born in November 1705 in Paris and brought up in the house of the Count de Rochechouart, one of the oldest noble families in France. He may have been the Count's illegitimate child, or perhaps his parents were the Count's employees. Louis Gabriel Guillemain showed talent for violin very early on, and so was sent off for lessons in Turin, Italy, with Giovanni Battista Summis. Summis was himself a student of Arcangelo Corelli, and his other students included the likes of Leclerc and Guillemain, who would also be key in shaping the formation of the French school. This very French violin school, which would later on greatly influence composers such as Mozart and Beethoven. By age 24, Guillemain was a member of the orchestra in Lyon. He then moved to Dijon, working for a wealthy patron, a de Bourbon noble. His Opus 1, Premier Livre de Sonate for violin and basso continuo, was published in Dijon in 1734. He then went on to be appointed first violinist of the Dijon Académie de Musique. Guillemain eventually moved back to Paris, where in 1737 he then became musicien ordinaire at court of King Louis XV, where he played in church services at the King's Chapel and in chamber music, some of which he composed himself. Court life suited him, and by the early 1740s he became one of Louis XV's favourite and most highly paid musicians. He would regularly perform in private concerts for the King and Queen, and was also leading the second violins in the orchestre of Madame de Pompadour's private theatre. She was one of the King's mistresses and frequently gave herself a starring role in her theatre. Fellow composer Louis-Claude Daquin praised Guillemain in his 1752 Lettres sur les hommes célèbres. When one speaks of a man full of fire, genius and life, one has to think of Monsieur Guillemain, musician to the King. He is perhaps the most extraordinary and adroit violinist one can hear play. There are no difficulties that can stump him, and he can compose learned pieces which sometimes embarrass his rivals. Among the great masters, this celebrated artist is one of the most productive. His works are full of touching beauty. He started publishing his music, and his works were frequently performed at the court in the late 1740s and early 1750s. His ballet pantomime Le Panthère Chinois, Paris, December 12, 1748, enjoyed extraordinary success. His penchant for the violin is brought out in the demands upon the violinist and the requisite virtuosic techniques. All of the genres for which he composed, sonatas, symphonies, concertinos, dances, harpsichord sonatas with violin accompaniment, and various dances, demonstrate Guillemain's keen awareness of the sonata allegro form. Characteristics of his compositions include a clear distinction between primary and secondary themes, key modulation, gallant stylings for the symphonic form, delightful melodies, and prime examples of the French instrumental style. He is said to have possessed a dazzling facility on the violin, main pétillante, rivaling or perhaps even surpassing Leclerc. His caprices may have inspired those of Paganini a generation later. His dazzling left hand left a fine musical legacy. Therefore, a source of inspiration for the great Paganini himself, contemporary accounts suggest he was actually timid and rarely appeared in public outside of performing. Even though his pieces were often heard in the famous Concert Spirituel in the Tuileries Palace, where over the Easter holidays the bourgeoisie and foreign tourists would go to listen in the fabulously decorated Swiss salon, he probably was not performing his pieces himself at the Concert Spirituel. Perhaps due to an uneasiness towards performing in front of large audiences, or it could be because by this time he had developed really bad financial problems. So was the cause of him not performing his own piece at the Concert Spirituel and it being performed by others the fact that he found it nerve-wracking? Or did he hide himself because of his financial problems? We're not entirely sure. Indeed, he was a spendthrift and liked extravagant things, including fine tapestries, furniture, and the best wine that money could buy. And before long, he was crippled by debt and constantly on the verge of bankruptcy. This may have forced him to publish collections of his compositions. Many of his works are characterized by dazzling virtuosity and technical brilliance, but because he needed money urgently, he purposely simplified some of his chamber pieces to make these more widely accessible, even announcing this in the preface of the scores so the musicians wouldn't be put off. So he went a bit commercial, so to speak. Even those pieces reveal chamber music of the utmost skill and beautifully display the Baroque gallant style popular in France at the time. His final years were very troubled, with bankruptcy hanging over him all the time, like a sword of Damocles. And he ended up becoming an alcoholic. Most contemporary accounts describe his death as an act of suicide, stabbing himself 14 times at the foot of a willow tree and then being hurriedly buried on the same day, just shy of his 65th birthday. He died in Chaville, then a small settlement near Paris, in 1770. However, the drinking habit and the fact that Guillemain was buried may in fact indicate that he had died a natural death. But this was a rather dramatic and horrifying end to a successful and colourful life with a career that had produced charming and captivating music. Here's a list of his works.